Hey mental workers, welcome back to the podcast. Today we got a really great episode for you, and I'm really stoked because we've got a listener story, but the listener stories we've had so far, they've been people who are kind of towards the end of their journey or people who have already finished and are well into registration. But today we've got a provisional psychologist and they are 1.5 years into their journey. We've got a year to go. And so I'm really keen to share with you the insights, thoughts, feelings, challenges, successes that they've had so far into their journey and where they're going to go. And here to take us all through it is Natalie Shamir. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Bronwyn. So happy to be on the podcast. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. It's so nice to have you on. So as I said, listeners, Natalie is a provisional psychologist and it's correct, right? You're 1.5 years into your journey?
Yes, that's right.
Awesome. And you're doing the 4+2 pathway?
Yeah, the 4+2 pathway.
Excellent. So listeners, what we're going to do in this episode is we'll frame where Natalie is at, where she's working, and then we'll talk about what prompted her to get into psychology. We'll talk about some of the good things, some of the challenges, and then we've got a really interesting discussion that I'm keen to have later about what Natalie's learned about self-disclosures in sessions. And then we've got some tips and tricks, and then we'll go through with what Natalie sees herself doing in the future. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Excellent. Let's jump into it then. So, Natalie, I'm very keen to hear from you just what you're doing currently. So could you tell us a bit about what setting you're doing your internship in and what your day-to-day role looks like?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm working as a school psychologist in a primary school and a high school, a senior high school. And the primary school is just K to 6, and the high school is a year 11 and 12 senior campus. So that's full time. It's 3 days at the primary school and 2 days at the senior high school.
And what kind of things make up your day?
Yeah, it's quite different from primary to high school. So I love the variety I get from each role, really. So in the high school, I see students that are 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, sometimes even 19 years old. But it's a lot of counselling there with those senior students. That's the majority of my role. It really is quite a revolving door in terms of just seeing students back to back or attending wellbeing meetings where we discuss, the main concerns regarding specific students that are just on our radar to keep an eye on. And at the primary school, it's quite varied. It's a mixture of, I'd say, assessment. So a lot of screeners, doing a lot of screener questionnaires, whether that's for ADHD, autism, anxiety, low mood, things like that. And doing obviously a little bit of counselling too, but more so the assessment. And we do a lot of paperwork to support students with additional needs or neurodiversity, and they're called access request applications. So it's perhaps, I like to think of it in simple terms as the primary school is a bit more paperwork and assessment and writing reports and parenting support and meetings, things like that. And the senior high school, a lot more face-to-face client contact.
Mm. No, it sounds really interesting. And I'm wondering, with the 4+2, you can, I guess, theoretically choose wherever you want to go and do your internships. I'm curious what drew you to working in the Department of Education in schools.
Yeah, so it kind of, I had a unique path to becoming a psychologist, a provisional psychologist. So I was a primary school teacher prior to that for a few years. And in that role, working as a teacher, I was really drawn to, I guess, the children who perhaps presented as neurodivergent or had wellbeing needs, and seeing the success in supporting those students with their wellbeing and to see how far they came throughout that year being their class teacher. I mean, I found that aspect of my role most rewarding. Yeah, so I guess that kind of led me down the path of naturally sticking to working in schools, really, and having that background experience of teaching. I mean, it's just given me such an advantage to be able to work with students in schools.
So you mentioned that you really enjoyed working with the students who were neurodivergent and needed that additional support. So was it becoming a psychologist was a way of getting more experience with this role, or was there some discomfort with teaching? Like, were there things you didn't like, or was it a bit of both?
Yeah, really good question. I'd say it's a bit of both in my case. I'd say that, my dad's a psychologist himself.
So, cool.
Yeah, a lot of people say to me, oh, you've followed in dad's footsteps, which I promise is not the case. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I definitely feel that I've always had an interest in psychology, in the profession. I've always been drawn to the wellbeing side of supporting young people. But also, on the other hand, in terms of teaching, I did find it was quite challenging in how physically exhausting it was, and mentally, just to support a class of, say, 26 students. And there were a lot of behavioural challenges. Yeah, it was just really exhausting. So for me, it was the natural next step really to pursue my specific interest in student wellbeing through doing school counselling or school psychology.
Cool. And I'm wondering, like, how long did you sit on the decision to stop teaching and then go into psychology?
Yeah, so it probably was, I taught for about 2 years, so not too long. And I ended up doing a retraining program through the Department of Education.
Oh, cool.
So they subsidised a fair bit of my university study to retrain. They gave me a placement, and that was all with, the guarantee of getting a permanent full-time position to work within the Department of Education.
Fantastic. I'm interested to dive into what have been the best things so far and then the most challenging things. So let's start with the best things. What have been the things that have been most interesting, surprising, and just fantastic for you?
The key one, which really is what got me into the career, is the sense of reward that we get from being a part of a young person's journey.
Can you tell us a bit more about what it feels like to be part of a young person's journey and just know that, I guess, the progress that they've made is something that you've been part of?
Yeah, working with these young people, it really is just such an honour, I feel, to often I will meet a young person and they'll open up so quickly and feel comfortable to share things with me that perhaps they haven't shared with anyone else. And I think that puts us as psychologists in quite a powerful position, and one that, I take seriously and I definitely don't take advantage of. And, I always let the young person know that I'm really grateful that they've opened up to me, and to be a part of that process, I think, where they invite me in to support them, to give them the tools that they may need to feel empowered enough to navigate the challenges and obstacles in their life. I really, it just makes me feel just really lucky, to be honest.
Yeah, I can really get the sense of those warm, fuzzy feelings that you get from being part of this young person's journey. And just before we move on to the most challenging things so far, I'm curious, having changed careers entirely and you're 1.5 years into it, do you feel like it's the right choice for you?
For sure, yeah. I mean, and of course we're going to unpack the challenges in a moment, but I definitely feel that this is the career for me, and that there's a lot that I bring to the role that I feel, despite the imposter syndrome that perhaps we all go through and experience as early career psychs, I think that I have found my calling, and I think that sense of reward is the key thing that keeps me in this career, really.
No, lovely. And I can totally relate to that sense of reward. It is so fulfilling when you see a person who has been really struggling just take some steps in the direction that they really want their life to go in. It's a feeling like no other.
For sure, yeah.
So let's move on then to unpacking some of the challenging things so far and how you've gotten through them and navigated them. And we'll give listeners some tips along the way. But did you want to start with anything in particular that stands out to you as a major challenge?
Yeah, I think more of a recent challenge that comes to mind has been just the nature of referrals lately have been typically that depressed mood presentation and even the more pointier end, self-harm, suicidal ideation. And when you're seeing clients back to back, even in a single day, that present that way, where it is that pointier end, heavy sort of discussions in those sessions, I have been reflecting on, the role that vicarious trauma plays and how it can impact on you to engage in perhaps that compassion fatigue, and how our cups essentially, I like to use the metaphor of our cups feeling quite drained and empty. And, we need to engage more and more in self-care to fill that cup back up so that we can still pour into other people's cups and support them on their, well-being journey.
Yeah, no, I think you're speaking to something really important because as a provisional psychologist, it might be some of the first time that you've heard of people's struggles with things like self-harm and suicidal ideation, and sometimes even suicide attempts. And sometimes people have really rough stuff going on at home. And you're right, when you're seeing people back to the back, it can be a bit like, oh my gosh, I haven't had time to breathe and digest like what they're saying to me. Is that how it feels to you? Do you feel like it's getting a bit heavy?
Yeah, it definitely has been really challenging. And often client presentations can kind of make you reflect on your life and
Totally.
where you're at. Yeah, and just, the people around you, and, can almost have a bit of an existential crisis moment where you go,
Yeah.
Where are we in the world where, so many services, at least in Sydney and New South Wales, I feel, I refer a lot of people on to external services, and then I have parents of young children coming back and telling me the wait list is a year to see a paediatrician. So at a structural, organisational level, I guess there are a lot of challenges there that, make it really difficult to support these young people.
Yeah. And, when I hear that, that brings up feelings of helplessness and despair to me. It's like, I know very well the challenges of referring clients and they're like, nope, they don't have any space, or it's a year-long wait list. And you're just like, bloody hell, there's like nowhere else that can help this person and give them the care that they need.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really challenging. And I think it's particularly difficult when, our service at the moment is quite short-staffed within schools, but also external services equally are either short-staffed or there are just too many referrals to manage. And we know the role that early intervention plays, especially working with young people, with kids, in the primary school age range. We're all about nipping things in the bud, and it's really difficult at the moment to do that when the wait lists are so long.
Yeah, I imagine that's quite frustrating for you.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a difficult one to navigate, and yeah, it can be definitely frustrating. And that sense of reward that gets you into the career and keeps you in the role, it starts to weather away a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Because it's like, I got in this biz to help people, not have them linger and become more mentally ill because they can't get the help they need.
For sure, yeah. And that's working through that, I think, in the last couple of months for me has been a major challenge, but I do have some tips in that regard.
Yeah, I would love to hear how you're navigating this and how you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone always recommends, how as psychologists we always have supervision on a regular basis of some kind. For provisional psychologists at the moment, for me, I've got fortnightly 1.5 hour check-ins with my supervisor. He's really supportive and helps me, reflect a lot. I mean, obviously the internship program is reflection is core to it. But he's really helped support me to navigate my caseload, the nature of complex cases that I'm managing, and perhaps looking at whether like job share partners can perhaps take on some of those more complex ones, or at least vary the, clients that I'm working with so that they're perhaps, not 80% depressed and perhaps suicidal in that pointy end. Just to have a little bit of a perhaps mental break,
Totally.
Where I can experience that sense of reward, where I'm like, oh, I can actually see some improvement in this client across sessions. So, yeah, supervision has been massive in supporting me in kind of taking a step back, having a bit of a breather, focusing on self-care, engaging in activities that I've previously really enjoyed, whether that's, going for a bike ride, going for a walk, getting up and getting out, really, getting in touch with nature, connecting with others socially. So, yeah, those grounding techniques, I guess, come to play as well. And so that's been helpful, and leaning on other colleagues as well, peer consultation, talking with other colleagues, where they've been helpful to kind of, do a bit of a joint case conceptualization for these more complex clients. That's been helpful too.
So it sounds like with supervision, you really like it because it's debriefing, but you also get that practical support with, okay, here's some ways we could solve the problems that you're facing and here's some things that you could try. And then with the peers, it sounds like it's also debriefing and that shared help with the practical side of things. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that, you've got the emotional side, and you hit the nail on the head there when you said the debriefing aspect. I think we all benefit from getting a little bit of perhaps empathy from our peers and just emotional support, like them acknowledging that, hey, it's really tough, the number of clients and pointy end, I guess, cases that you're managing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of that is that, and I've mentioned before, I've got inattentive ADHD, and so that plays a significant role in my role as a psychologist and how I really do need that more structural support to manage caseload, to even navigate, week by week, how many cases I'll take on. And
yeah, no, I'm really glad that you have those supports, and it sounds really valuable for listeners to know as well, just the importance of that. I guess one question I have for you, Natalie, is how do you make sure that you're getting what you need from supervision?
Yeah, I've got a good system in place at the moment that works for me. So I always, anytime I think of something and reflect and go, oh, this would be good to talk to my supervisor about in supervision, I'll normally add it to a bit of a drafted agenda. And then usually the day before that fortnightly scheduled supervision session, that's when I'll pass that agenda on to my supervisor so that he can also prepare if there's some resources, if it's professional learning, for example, that I want to work on or learn a bit more about. Just gives him opportunity to get prepared as well prior to that supervision session. But that's been really helpful for me, is to just write it all down anytime a thought pops in my head that would be helpful discussing.
No, brilliant. So just take us through this challenge that you mentioned to us about supporting young people who are gender or sexually diverse.
Yeah, so working within, the public sector, within the public education sector, I think that more and more I'm seeing students feeling comfortable to share in session with me, their gender identity journey, or if they've got questions around their sexuality. The challenging aspect of working with these students is that, within the school culture and school structure, it can be a little bit difficult to advocate and to support these young people, especially when society as a whole, I feel a little bit still behind in a way. And perhaps, as well, a lot of teachers, even my own experience, studying to be a teacher, we weren't given that much training around or even education around what does gender identity mean, what does sexuality mean, what are pronouns, and what are all these different labels, what do they mean, and how do I support this young person in my classroom? So yeah, those students that present to me in counselling sessions have been difficult to support, not because of necessarily their presentation, but because of the structural and cultural and lack of education that is present really at the moment.
What are these students needing that you find it hard to advocate for them for because of those structural barriers?
Yeah, I think young people essentially just want to feel accepted, feel understood. I think a barrier to that is the unfortunate nature that, sexuality and gender diversity, there's not a lot of understanding around it, but there's also quite a lot of anxiety within school systems to educate further because of perhaps parent responses or individual parent community opinions around that. So that's a barrier to, I guess, allowing for celebrations to occur, such as Wear It Purple Day in school settings, or hesitancy for various schools to be proactive in this space.
That's a real shame, isn't it? Because, again, it's like you want to meet those clients' needs and make sure that they can be accepted by the community. But, I wasn't aware that there was a bit of anxiety in schools about educating further. Like, are they scared that, I don't know, if they educate further about gender identity, that everyone's going to be gender diverse or something?
It's a really good question. I genuinely believe that, obviously not myself, but, I think that there are perhaps, members within school communities that do feel quite anxious about what questions will follow and how do we even answer those questions, because, whether it's teachers or the executive staff of schools, they have such limited understanding and access to education themselves that they're not sure how to handle those questions that may come from parents or from students themselves. So unfortunately, the approach that is taken is to take more of a reactive approach and not a proactive approach.
Is there capacity in your role as a psychologist to advocate on this? Like, is that a role that you can play in schools and be like, hey, I think it's really important that we do educate further about this?
Yeah. I think that I'm quite lucky in my position where I do have a bit of flexibility within my role. Yes, I do assessment and counselling, which is core to my role as a school psychologist, but I also have a bit of flexibility to work within the wellbeing team or learning support team within primaries and high schools. So as an example, one of my schools, the high school, we've got what's called the GSA, which stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance.
Oh, cool.
And lots of high schools run these student social clubs, really, and it's kind of an opt-in process. We just run it at lunchtime once a fortnight, and it's specifically for kids who identify as either gender or sexuality diverse, but it's also open to their friends and allies and even any teachers that want to join and just, come and connect with others, like-minded individuals, and have a safe space that they can turn to.
So I guess, could this be a way of changing the school culture? Do you feel hopeful about this?
I do, yeah. In the high schools, it's worked. And again, it depends. everything requires executive level approval by the principal, by deputy principals, but it's been really successful within my senior high school where I work at. And in terms of the primary school sector, that can be a little bit more challenging to run something like that. It's typically run in high schools, but celebrating something like Wear It Purple Day, I think, is a wonderful start to perhaps that gentle acknowledgement of, hey, there are gender or sexuality diverse children, within our school setting, and, you're seen, you're valid, and we accept you, and not only accept, but we celebrate that diversity.
Yeah. No, that's really beautiful. Yeah. And what an affirming message to children and young people who are gender diverse.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's really wonderful that we have, events like Wear It Purple Day that was started, I believe, in a school in Sydney.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's so cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it started about 10 years ago. So where Purple Day just passed recently. And I was having a read of how it all started, but I think it started about 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. What I'm hearing is that you're highlighting that I guess when you work in a school, there can be cultures within the school that do not, I guess, sit well with psychologists, like where we could say, look, you need to accept and celebrate gender diverse folks. And then the culture of the school is quite hesitant, and that can be a real challenge to navigate.
It can be, yeah. And it definitely makes you feel like you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in those circumstances. But I think there is always opportunity to bring about positive and more accepting cultural change. It's just something that needs to be carefully planned and mapped out, and something that you kind of chip away at. And it's not something that I've learned that you kind of can't just come in and want to shake things up completely, because we're not talking about working with one person. We're talking about working with an entire school community.
Yeah, which is like, teachers, parents, students, support workers, education assistants, like everyone.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, really good point. So don't expect that cultural change will happen in one day. Be patient and chip away at it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Natalie, are there any other challenges that you wanted to take listeners through that you've navigated so far?
Probably one more quick challenge to mention is around just having inattentive ADHD and navigating that.
Yeah, tell us about
it. As a psychologist. Yeah. So, I was only diagnosed about a year ago. The journey of exploring even pharmacotherapy and taking Ritalin versus Vyvanse, that's been an interesting journey where I'm still working on that. I'm trying to navigate the side effects and seeing what medication, I guess, works for me that will help my brain be that little bit sharper. But it's been challenging I find perhaps the counselling side of things. In the session I found in the past more so, where I was shadowing and learning the ropes of how to be a school psychologist, I found that I would either lose my train of thought or would take my case notes and write them down after the session rather than taking notes during the session.
Oh, yeah.
And a key thing I learned was definitely take notes during the session so that you don't forget.
Yep.
And that way it's a lot more accurate, as opposed to, okay, I've been working with this student for an hour, I've been having discussion, and now I have to try and recall, a summary of all that information. And if I don't have any case notes that I've just written some bullet points down in the session, that's just really challenging to do. So
yeah, no, same. I know there's some psychologists who say nope, I don't take any notes during the session, but my working memory is so poor that it's like if I didn't, I would be after the session, I have no idea what just transpired. And I would just come up with a complete blank. I can't remember stuff from an hour ago, so it's I also take notes during the session.
Yes, it was definitely a tip that I've been using and will continue to use. Great. And has allowed me to keep on track and have accurate case notes, which is what we want.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Okay, let's move on then to talking about self-disclosure. So have you noticed that with young people that they want you to self-disclose, or has it been that you've been I have a relevant experience here that I could share?
Yeah, I find that I guess young people haven't expressed that they'd like me to self-disclose, I guess, because they don't know either that I have ADHD or that I identify within the queer community. But that definitely has come up, and there's been specific times where I feel it's appropriate to share that. I definitely don't disclose that at any opportunity. And at every session with any client, there's a number of factors that come into play where I would feel both comfortable and feel it's appropriate for the therapeutic session to share that.
Yeah. And like, has that been difficult for you? Like maybe as a teacher, did you disclose much, or how's self-disclosure looked at when you're a teacher?
Yeah, I would say, and again, this is just going off my own experience, but I'd say it's quite different in that when I was a teacher, there was definitely a lot of anxiety around, well, as a teacher, I didn't have my ADHD diagnosis, but in terms of being a member of the LGBT community, I didn't share that I was a member of that community, even if I had a student in my class who was quite visibly a member, perhaps, of the queer community themselves. But I just didn't feel, and again, this comes back to perhaps the culture of the specific school that one works in. You know, if you feel that perhaps that might, you know, sharing that, oh, on the weekend, you know, I went with my female partner to the beach, you know, even mentioning that, there's a bit of anxiety to share that when I was a teacher. The anxiety that came from not wanting to self-disclose when I was a teacher mainly came from the fact that I worried a lot about what parents would say or how they'd respond if their child came home and shared that.
Oh, okay. So there was a lot of fear around that.
Yeah, there was.
Isn't that sad?
It is, yeah. And I think we're slowly but surely moving toward a culture where it is okay to share that, and feeling that, you know, even if say a parent was to contact the principal of the school and express that, you know, they thought that was, you know, inappropriate or anything like that, we're moving to a culture where we feel that principals will back us, so to say, and kind of not really buy into even that level of conversation with a parent.
Yeah. No, that's really good to hear that you feel like that's shifting a bit, because obviously there have been some fairly high profile cases where teachers have been dismissed for being part of the queer community.
There has been, yeah. And I think it really depends on what type of school you work in, whether it's public versus private sector schools or independent, Catholic, you know, those perhaps more religious schools. I mean, they all have a very different culture, is the sense that I get.
Just jumping off what you said before, that you share when you feel like it's appropriate to the therapeutic relationship and when it will be of benefit to the client. I guess, do you feel more comfy now owning that identity as being part of the queer community and being neurodivergent now that you're a psychologist? Is it different?
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, reflecting on, you know, these labels essentially that I have, I've experienced these labels from a more empowering perspective rather than like a deficit model approach. I've kind of reflected and gone, well, these are my labels, and it helps me communicate with others, you know, how I present myself, how, you know, my brain is wired a little bit differently. It's also quite helpful in, you know, understanding and explaining that psychoeducation around, you know, either gender identity or sexuality or, ADHD. So in some ways, I really feel as a psychologist that, you know, even among colleagues, that, you know, these labels are celebrated.
Yeah.
And there isn't that stigma within the psychology community, but it's interesting that perhaps as a teacher and perhaps in other fields, it can be seen as a stigma.
I'm really excited that you feel that way because, as somebody going through the provision, I'm really excited that that's the perception that's being created, because absolutely from my perspective, being like 3 years registered, I absolutely see these important parts of ourselves as being useful therapeutically. Like the more authentic we can be, we don't necessarily have to disclose it to clients, but the more us we can be, I think the better for therapist well-being, and I think it produces good outcomes for clients. So I'm really glad that you're feeling that it's celebrated, because I feel like it's worth celebrating.
Yeah, and it should be, you know. I think that, you know, these things, you know, I think that every single human brain is so unique and we're all wired differently. So sometimes I reflect and go, even though I'm explaining doing a bit of psychoeducation on, say a young person presents with the label of having ADHD or anything really, in some ways I think, it just offers an opportunity to understand each other better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it helps us relate to one another in better ways.
Yeah, 100%. So I know you were really keen to giving listeners some tips about case reports. Okay, hit us.
Yeah, so, I've reflected, I'm about, like you said, a year and a half into my 4+2 journey, and I've successfully just heard back a month ago that I've gotten my first case report approved. So,
woo, well done.
So thank you. That's very exciting. It was a tiresome process getting there to submit my first one, because it probably took about a year or just over from the point of drafting it to actually getting it submitted.
They can be really extensive.
Yeah, I think my hot tip is to get started early, because once you do have a go of writing the case report and you've done it, and even better, get it submitted and approved, that kind of imposter syndrome kind of fades away, or that, that question of, is it good enough? Do I know what I'm writing in this report? Do I know my stuff? And it helps to build that confidence to submit the next one and the next one. So, yeah, I've been on a bit of a roll, and now I've got my second and third one drafted and submitted the second one, waiting to hear back. But I've kind of, taken a year to do the first one and get that approved, and then the second and third one I've drafted within about a month or two time frame.
That's amazing. Doesn't that really speak to how far you've come and how much you've learned? I get what you're saying, that it can really boost your confidence and be like, yay, I'm learning.
Yes, exactly. And I think that first one took such a long time to draft, because when I first started drafting it, I was very much at the start of my internship, that +2 pathway. But even it's incredible, a year and a half into it, I feel, maybe not pro level, but I definitely feel a whole lot more confident going into writing these case reports. But it's a lot to get your head around. And, my tip, to fellow prov psychs is to get started, talk to your supervisor about what clients, might be appropriate to do a case report on.
Yeah.
And I also found doing the assessment case reports first and then looking at the intervention ones was a better approach of going about it.
No, good tips, and really good tip about talking to your supervisor early about selecting clients, because I know just from seeing provisional psychs online and having been a provisional psych myself, there were lots of interesting cases I wanted to do, but they were too complex for the case reports. You just got to go with a very simple presentation where you can demonstrate to the board that you know what you're doing. You know what an assessment is, you know how to intervene, and you can do that with something pretty standard. If you do something that's too complex, you'll go over the word limit, and then you won't be able to showcase anything.
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
And, my assessment case reports have looked at, as an example, the first one looked at mild intellectual disability.
Great.
The second one looked at specific learning disorder. And then now I've just drafted my first intervention case report, which is looking at depression. And Brilliant. I've already got my fourth one lined up for
look at
intervention. You. Yeah, and that's on anxiety or social anxiety disorder probably. But
yeah, I did one on depression and one on social anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that they're, probably the ones that are neater to write.
they're pretty neat to write. Yeah, you're right. So I think they're quite good selections. Nice. Well done.
Thank you.
Let's talk about just where you want to go in the future. Like, I know you're still in your provisional psych, and this might be a bit of a question that comes with some pressure, but is there any direction that you want to go in the future? Do you like working with children and high school kids, or do you want to go back to just the young kids? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I've reflected on this actually a lot more recently as I'm coming up to hopefully wrapping up the, prov psych journey and eventually becoming a fully registered psychologist, hopefully next year. But I definitely feel that since I've been working, it's been the start of last year, I've been working in the senior high school, and I've really enjoyed working with the more senior and older students.
Cool.
And so that, reflecting on that has made me go, oh, how funny that I'm a primary school teacher.
Yeah.
And I've worked with primary age kids for, 5-6 years now. And yet I really enjoy, in terms of psychology and counselling, I really enjoy working with the older students. And so that has kind of indicated to me that in the future I probably will always enjoy working with youth, but I don't know, maybe even working for Headspace, or, if I do private practice, I'd love to give a go of working with adults as well, kind of more across the lifespan.
Yeah, cool.
So, that's kind of where my head's at in terms of, the sort of clients I want to work with and age ranges.
No, that's really exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up then, Natalie. It has been a delight to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on board and sharing your personal experiences with us and your professional journey. I really wish you the best of luck with the remainder of your Hall Plus 2 internship, and you'll have to let us know when you get registered so we can all celebrate for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to share my story, and I only hope that it helps at least one listener out there.
I reckon it will. And so, Natalie, if listeners want to learn more about you or get in touch, where can they find you?
So they can check out my Instagram handle. It is a relatively new account, but I've got some free resources on there. But the handle is @thatschoolcounsellor. And give me a follow on there and check out the free resources that I've popped on there.
Fantastic. And I'll pop that link in the show notes for listeners. Well, thank you again, Natalie. And thank you, listeners, for listening. Catch you next time and have a good one. Bye.